when we write chords in root position, we can see that the notes are all stacked very neatly. Whether they're on lines or on spaces, everything's very tight and very compact because they're built in that interval of a third. When we create chords that are inversions, then you'll notice that there are a couple of notes that have larger gaps. For example, if we change this to a first inversion chord, then we see that there's a larger gap between these two notes. That gap is actually the interval of a fourth, and identifying that gap can actually help you identify what the root of a chord is. So for example, we see this interval of a fourth here. The higher of those two notes is a C, and therefore the root of the chord is C. Same thing with second inversion chords. If we turn this to second inversion, then we have a gap between these two notes, again, the interval of a fourth. And the higher note is C, and therefore the root is C. Okay? So, utilizing this method can really help you when you're trying to identify triads that are inverted. If we look at a couple of examples, we've got a mystery chord here. We don't know what the root is, we don't know what the chord is, okay? But we can look at it and see that there's a gap between these two notes. Again, it's the interval of a fourth. The highest note of that gap is a D, and therefore the root is D. The other notes that we're looking at are D, F, and A. And so when we see it this way, then we can identify a little bit quicker that it's a D minor chord. Now, to complete the process, we see that the lowest note is A. And therefore, since the lowest note is A, then that means it's a second inversion chord. So it's a D minor chord that's in second inversion. Let's look at one more example. Here, again, we have a mystery chord. We don't know what the root is, we don't know what the chord is. But we can still see that there is a gap here. Again, we can see that interval of a fourth. The higher of those two notes is a G, and therefore the root is G. Okay? The other notes that we see in the chord are B flat and D flat. So when we write it out this way, then we can see that see much quicker that it's a G diminished chord. Again, to complete the process, we see that B flat is the lowest note, and therefore, since B flat is the lowest note, that means it's in first inversion. So it's a G diminished chord in first inversion. Obviously, things are starting to get a little bit more complicated, and to really make this an efficient process, then you really need to be confident with building chords and identifying chords. So if you feel a little bit shaky, I would encourage you to go back and review some of that stuff first. Then do a little bit of practice with this. And then in the next lesson, we're going to talk about something that's even a little bit more complicated. And I'll surprise you with that when I see you in the next lesson.